Hi everyone, bonjour tout le monde. Welcome online and in person to Concordia University's For Space. We're so excited that you could join us for this behind the scenes exploration of the Headlight Anthology. Thanks to Misha, Sherine, Carlos, and Penelope, who will be introducing themselves shortly, for allowing us an insider look into this graduate publication. We're so pleased that you're able to join us in this way today on this beautiful rainy day from wherever you may be. So just before we get started, I'd like to let everyone know that we are actually streaming this conversation to YouTube live from For Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. And we'd like to also extend our gratitude to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, who are the caretakers of the lands and waters on which we're meeting today, for their teachings about the earth and our relations. At For Space, we work with our community of faculty, students, and staff to basically connect folks to the ongoing research projects and various initiatives in development here at the university with the idea of co-creating knowledge and building community. And so it's really wonderful to have the opportunity to connect with this team about this ongoing project they'll tell you all about. We look forward to getting right into the conversation. So I think I'll pass the floor to today's moderator, Misha. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Anna, and thank you to For Space for hosting us here. So yes, welcome to Headlight Anthology, Behind the Scenes. I am Misha Solomon. I will be the moderator for this conversation, and I'll introduce myself briefly before introducing our panelists, our contributors, our colleagues, et cetera, et cetera. So my name is Misha Solomon, he, him pronouns, and I am a contributor to this most recent Headlight issue. We'll tell you a little bit more about what Headlight is moving forward as well. And I'm also currently a consulting editor for Headlight as Headlight transitions school years, and I'll be involved in some editorial capacity next year with Headlight as well. So I'm going to ask each of you now to introduce yourselves. If you could just introduce yourselves, your name, pronouns if you'd like, and your connection to Headlight briefly. And then we're going to get more into your roles with Headlight and what Headlight Anthology even is. So we will start with the first of you to be involved with Headlight chronologically. So we'll start with Penelope.
Hi, I'm Penelope. I'm an editor and a communications professional. I work and have worked in Montreal for a while now, but before that I did my master's at Concordia, during which time, yes, I was involved with Headlight. I was the managing editor for the 21st issue, I believe, and then became the editor-in-chief for the 22nd issue, and I think that was between 2017 and 2019. So that's where I'm coming from. Oh, and my pronouns are she, her.
Thanks so much, Penelope. And then in alphabetical order, based on chronology, we'll go to Sherine. Oh, Carlos, why don't you step in while Shirine's tech comes together?
Yes, I should say Shirine's joining us from Egypt right now, and I'm joining from Tiohtià:ke, or from behind this this background here. Sherine, can you hear us now? Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can go ahead, Carlos. I think I froze for a second. Yeah.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I'm Carlos Pittella. I use he, him pronouns. And Sherine and I were the co-managing editors of the last issue of Headlight 24. I feel like between Penelope's time and ours, there was the pandemic. So we have lots to talk about it. I just graduated from the MA in English Creative Writing at Concordia with a thesis on border crossing poems and bureaucracies. I write a lot about those things, whether I want it or not. And I should also add, I'm from Brazil, from Rio, and I've been in Montreal for about 2 years now, a little bit more than 2 years now. And I've moved around a lot, hence the bureaucracies and borders in my poems. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Sherine.
Yeah, so my name is Sherine Elbanhawy. I'm an Egyptian Canadian writer, editor, translator. I was lucky to be a co-managing editor with Carlos this year and sort of bring Headlight back to life after the pandemic. And yeah, I love being involved in collections and journals because of the community and the opportunities it creates. And Headlight was a perfect example of that. So it's great to be here.
Thank you. Thanks to all three of you. I should say, just to give a little more context, I'm going to my second year of the MA program here in the creative writing stream, and I am of Jojage Montreal, born and bred and raised and living here. So before we get into talking about each of your experiences with Headlight specifically, I thought it would be good to talk about what Headlight Anthology is, period. And so what I thought we would do is I would like each of you to give your own description of what Headlight is. You know, Headlight is, I will say, in its simplest form, a literary journal hosted here at Concordia. But I feel like there's lots of ways to approach a description of what Headlight is. And so I'd like to hear from each of you what you think Headlight Anthology is. And we'll start again with Penelope. You don't have to feel the need to be uber creative here. Just what is Headlight Anthology to you, Penelope?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's, a literary journal, a student-run journal out of Concordia's graduate English department that kind of gathers, at least in my time, it gathered writing from students in that department, of which there was a creative stream. So a lot of it comes from there, but then also took submissions from the rest of Canada and beyond. So kind of brings the Concordia community into contact with writers elsewhere as well, and puts it all together into a nice journal. For anyone who enjoys literature to enjoy, I guess.
Thank you. Okay. I feel like I'll go to Sherine now. This feels like this is like the hardest place to go second. It's like you're not in the wild place third where you just start going off, and you're not in the first simplest place. But go ahead, Sherine. What is Headlight Anthology?
So Headlight is a home for writers, I would say, in Montreal. It's and not just students, and it's also a place to develop professionally and become and sort of when you're in that in-between place between being a student and figuring out what you want to do creatively, it bridges that gap and shows you different paths of how you can be an editor or how you can be part of what all the different tasks it takes to create and publish a journal, I would say.
Thanks, Sherine. Carlos, do you want anything to add?
I agree with both answers. I absolutely agree that is a training ground for students and editors. I mean, when you look at the themes from past issues, it almost seems like that every writer has passed by Headlight to an editor one way or another, which is fascinating to see. I would add that by definition, Headlight is always looking ahead and always perilously hanging by a thread, because since every year has a new editorial team, everything can change for the good or for the bad. I mean, it's a dangerous enterprise, Headlight, in that sense. And that comes with a lot of crisis, but also with a lot of opportunities. And I'm sure we're gonna get to talk about it. Since I was the third to answer and I have nothing to lose, I would say that Headlight has nothing to lose when the new editorial team takes over, which is kind of cool and in its own way, and especially after the pandemic.
Thanks, Carlos. Yeah. So speaking of taking over, speaking of the timeline, I feel like now we're going to put into place sort of the third part of what this event is. We know who the participants are. We know what it's about broadly, and now why it's happening, which is that this is really a discussion about the past, present, and future of Headlight. in some way, I suppose I'm here representing some sort of future, if we're looking at time as linear, if you buy into that. But we're gonna go back into the past now. So Headlight Anthology was the first issue came out in 1998. And any of you feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Carlos, there we go. 1998 Headlight number 1, and then for 20 years. Chugged along happily. We won't be talking about the deep archive here until we get to Penelope. Not to say that it didn't chug along happily when Penelope came into the picture, but we have Penelope here talking about their experience with issue number 21. And so Penelope, we'll start with you. If you could talk a little bit more about your time with Headlight broadly. So you talked about being involved in editorial capacity and then being the EIC in your second year. If you could just give a brief overview of what your experience with Headlight was like and what your role entailed more specifically, and then we'll move on time-wise from there.
Sure. Yeah, so when I first entered Concordia's master's program, I think that was fall of 2017, I was looking right away to get involved in a student journal. I had done things like that in my undergrad as well, and always wanted to be part of that. So Headlight was advertising at the time for their editorial staff, and I got the position of the managing editor, which was not the commanding officer, I guess. That was the editor. That was called the editor-in-chief. So I had the editor-in-chief, Emily Crompton. She was my senior, and she brought me on and trained me as her managing editor. So, I mean, most of what I knew I owed to her, because she introduced me to everything and knew everyone in the department and told me where to go. So every credit that goes to me also goes to her first. And yeah, so for that first year, I had her tutelage, and that was great. Because I think, yeah, if I had started completely on my own in charge, it would have been a lot more difficult. But I had that first year where I was assisting her and doing a lot of the administrative tasks, but not in charge. So I had that. And then the following year in 2018, she asked me if I wanted to take over after she graduated, and I said yes. And so then I became the editor-in-chief and was overseeing everything, and had a couple of managing editors of my own who really helped me as well. And yeah, brought on a whole staff. I, asked people I knew in the department. Everyone that I could, I brought on board. And yeah, I mean, that's really the overview of my role, I guess, from managing editor to editor-in-chief the second year. And yeah, so then I pulled it together the way Carlos and Sherine did this year, I guess, but without some of the extra features that they added, which I'm very impressed by. So yeah, that's mainly it for me.
Before we do move on to Carlos and Sherine, who will be talking a lot about the transition into their managing roles, especially through the extra challenges that the pandemic put in front of Headlight. When you were both an ME and an EIC for Headlight, what were there specific challenges, either institutionally or specifically regarding Headlight, or was it relatively smooth sailing during your time with the magazine?
I mean, there are always challenges. I would say definitely, yeah, some of the administrative stuff, it was just kind of not knowing where to go and having to figure it out with Emily a bit. And in particular, kind of managing the account was a bit of a problem, like the Headlight spending account that they had with Concordia, because we had to, go to several people to get signing authority on that. And it was a bit of a challenge to, once we had like funding deposited into that account, to actually like get it out of there and like give it to people. Because yeah, like a lot of funders understandably, they won't make out checks to individuals. They will only give it to like an institutional account. So most of our funds were kind of trapped in there initially, and then we would have to sort of get them out, which was a bit difficult, but it all works out. It just took some time and figuring out who the contacts were, but Emily was really good with that. She knew a lot of people, and also at the time, pre-pandemic, it was pretty easy to just kind of like walk into an office and be like, hey, can I speak to someone here who knows about this? So there was some of that as well. And I guess besides that, I mean, there was a bit of a challenge in terms of we wanted to kind of expand the range of submissions, I think, because in prior years we hadn't received as many as maybe we would have liked. So I know that the year that I was editor-in-chief, we kind of really tried to branch out, and the managing editors and I were kind of sending emails to basically like every English department we could find kind of across Canada practically, I think, asking them to, spread this call to their members if anyone is interested. And that worked pretty well. We got a lot more submissions than we had previously, I think. But yeah, I mean, it's been a while for me. I feel like my memory isn't as clear as it could be anymore, but I think those are the two things that stand out for me. It was just kind of like figuring out the administrative tangle of where do you go, who do you ask, and who can do this for you, and who can give you this authority. And then also, yeah, just getting the word out to kind of bring in more and more interesting submissions. So those were the main ones for me.
Great. And the last question I'll ask you, is the issue that you were the editor-in-chief for, number 21, the title of that issue is or was in fact Interruptions. Am I getting the issue right? Do you remember, Penelope?
21 is the one that I was the managing editor for.
Okay, that was
But
Interruptions.
yes, the title
Okay.
was Interruptions.
Interruptions,
yes.
which is funny thinking about the interruptions that we're about to talk about moving into the present of Headlight. But so you were the editor-in-chief of you were the managing editor of Interruptions, the editor-in-chief of Blank Realism, and then to catch everyone up, then Headlight was dormant. So after issue number 22, the pandemic hit, and it was not until 3 years later that an issue of Headlight was printed again. And so I'll let Sherine and Carlos, in your patented tandem twofer style, tell us a little bit about what happened post Penelope and pre Headlight number 24. We'll talk about number 20, the lost issue number 23 in the meantime. And we should say that we're also having this conversation on the eve of the sort of end of the launch period of Headlight 24. So tomorrow in this very space at 2 p.m., there is part 2 of the Headlight 24 launch. It's a 2-part launch. And so this is sort of a little interstitial launch event as part of Headlight number 24. So what's gone on over the past 3 years, Carlos and Sherine? We'll do an abbreviated version of the big adventure you've had in your roles as Headlight co-managing editors without an editor-in-chief. So the big bosses of Headlight.
How to even start, Sherine? How to even start that conversation? There's so much, right?
I know. I think what's really great about everything that Penelope said is that it's true for us too, right? Like these are the challenges for editors and managing editors or editor-in-chiefs of literary journalism, like across the world. Like like how do you start it, and I think and how do you get the authority, and how do you get the ball rolling? Of course, for us it was again sort of harder because of the pandemic, but we had the same issues. And really, what my grandmother told me as a kid was like rolling through my head when Penelope was talking. When there's a will, there's a way. You know, Penelope overcame it. She got Emily's help. We helped each other, Carlos. And yeah, we just, you have to like not give up in facing all the hurdles and saying, okay, we can do this. And I think you were definitely a big motivation, and in gathering people and in creating the momentum for this issue.
Yes, absolutely. And there are a few things that I feel like it's nice to say it. Like first, there were actually two teams in between Penelope's team and our team, but those teams were struggling because with the pandemic, I mean, everything was put on pause, especially literary journals, and funding didn't come through. And then the editors that were in charge graduated and then graduated again. And then there was one editor left by the time Sherine and I were invited to apply to co-managing Headlight without an editor-in-chief, which was an interesting decision as well. And I feel like that move also mimicked a lot of the ways people were rethinking literary journals in terms of structure at the time after the pandemic. So much happened. And then when we looked back into the Headlight email, which now we could access to see what was the last time the Headlight felt really organized, then we found all of the templates prepared by Penelope. So I feel like we got to know Penelope before meeting Penelope. And when we got to use a lot of those templates for funding, to find out where to apply. And then in some way, what Emily did for you, you did for us without knowing. So that was really interesting. You were like our ghost mentor, if you will, which is fascinating. And then we did recycle a lot of your templates. And then because of that, we could move into different directions. Like we played with submissions, we played with sound, and we can talk about those things as well. But I feel like the mentorship, I think it's really important. This like a lineage of editors at the Concordia department teaching each other, and then and practice. Maybe Misha will learn something from us. Who knows?
So, you know, this we're having a conversation among editors in some capacity, and editors are the best editors, or in some ways the least seen ones, right? You want as an editor to sort of disappear into your issue, but you also leave an indelible mark on a journal, on anything that you work on. You know, Carlos and Sherine, with your specific circumstances of sort of reviving Headlight, there was, you know, a legacy kind of mark, but any editor leaves a mark on their issue. And so I wanted to ask each of you about your editorial MO, your sort of, I tried to think of a fun word, but whatever the poetics is of an editor, what your personal mission mandate that you give yourself as a curator, as an editor, as a curator of creative content. And so I'll start again with Penelope.
I mean, it's an interesting question. And it's a good one, even though I've never thought about it like that before, like having an MO as an editor. But yeah, well, I mean, I think for me, when I was at Concordia, I wasn't in the creative stream. I was from the academic side. I was just doing an academic research project. And that's mostly how I've been. I mean, I occasionally, you know, have written creatively on the side, but nothing that I've really ever like submitted for publication, very informally. So I know for me, I feel like sometimes I'm less of a participant in like the creative aspect than a lot of the other editors I've worked with, because they do have that experience of being quite experienced poets or fiction writers or whatever, and I didn't. So for me, I see myself more as kind of like a facilitator of that and not so much a participant. And it's also a way for me to be close to that, because since I don't really touch it myself as a writer, being involved with literary journals was always a really fun way for me to have a lot of contact with, you know, the writing that was being produced by my peers. and to be in that creative space without actually being in it as a creative producer myself. So yeah, for me, I kind of looked at it as like, these wonderful artists are doing their creative thing, and I'm going to organize it and hold it all together, and create a space for it and give some structure to that. And that's where my skills lie, I think, as well, is just in being organized and applying a structure to that artistic output. So I guess that's how I kind of see it, as, kind of business-like, like I'm bringing the business side. But it's all in appreciation and celebration of the creative products that I really admire and appreciate. So my way of contributing to that scene, I guess, without being a writer myself.
That's great. And when you think about sort of the actual curation that goes into the issue, so, choosing what's quote unquote good or what fits with the issue, did you find yourself, okay, I know how Sherine and Carlos worked in this regard, but did you find yourself deferring in some capacity to your genre editors, and you really handled more of the overarching structure of the issue, or were you involved in that creative curation?
If I remember, I deferred almost completely to the genre editors. I mean, obviously I looked at everything they chose and read all the submissions, but no, I don't think I ever used like a veto power or anything. Like, I pretty much just let them do their thing because they were great and knew their stuff. And yeah, that was kind of how I preferred it. Like, I wanted to have a team with me who was poetry editors who really know poetry, and fiction editors who really know fiction. And then I can, chair the meetings and get the funding and get everything organized and make the wheels roll smoothly for this whole process. But yeah, I did really let the genre editors mainly have, almost complete creative control over any creative edits. Yeah.
Great. Now, Carlos, you're someone I associate strongly with poetics broadly. But what is your poetics as an editor? What is your MO as an editor and as the editor of Headlight specifically?
I think that's really important to form a team, right, that you trust. So how do you go about this? It's very important. I feel like before we even formed the team, or before we even could move on into our own issue, Sherine and I got along immediately for many reasons that are hard to explain, but have to do with a lot of experience with bureaucracy in life and border crossings. There's a lot of things going on there. So we got along immediately. So that helped a lot. But then we also approached, I'll speak for myself, but I think we approached similarly team building. And we felt like we needed to honor what came before we could move on. And what came before was this limbo of submissions and editorial teams that were extremely affected by the pandemic. So we had to figure out how we would do this and how to honor the so-called lost issue number 23 that we ended up publishing only online before we moved on. And then when we came to team building, the big question, at least for me, was how to share power. And how do you balance power among the editors? And I don't know how we came up with this before, but it became clear that we had to figure out how to do this. And I think the solution was similar to what Penelope said. With one complication regarding our submission system, we wanted submissions to be anonymous, which means the genre editors couldn't see who was submitting. So they had the liberty to reject, even if we're by a friend or someone who knows him, then even though they might not know who submitted. So we wanted submissions to be anonymous. But that means that Sherine and I needed to be able to see the identity as managing editors of the submitters in case we needed to communicate with them for whatever reason. So the way we figured this out was the managing editors, us, Sherine and I, could see the identities, but the genre editors couldn't. And then to balance power, what do? We gave final say to the genre editors regarding their genre. So they had final calls in terms of acceptance of rejections, but they couldn't see the identities. So that generated some interesting power dynamics, but everyone had veto power in case of an issue came up. And then we can talk about ethical guidelines later, but I won't open that door now, but I want to hear what Sherine has to say too.
Yeah, so Sherine, Carlos is doing my job for me, throwing it over to you.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I agree, of course, with everything that Carlos and Penelope said, and all that is really important for being an editor. And I think what's the strongest thing for me is the team, right? Like we create trust, we create friendship, we create transparency, we create a place where we find friendship, where we find support, where we find creativity together. And in that way, anything that comes across, we're able to handle. And the stronger that bond is, the stronger the issue comes out. And I already miss like our Headlight 2014. Like I love them so much. Because that's what Carlos and I were able to do. We were able to create that space for the team. And I think, that's if in any board or editorial capacity, that's always what I would aim to do.
Great, a lot of very collaborative folks on this panel. Carlos, I want to go back to something you were talking about. You said you were opening the door to a sort of a thornier conversation. So I wanted to ask if there were any thorny conversations that did happen that you can talk about here, and sort of in tandem with that question, if you wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of the statement that you and Sherine, but that you worked to put together in terms of Headlight's positionality and position as a journal. If you could talk a little bit about that and what you were referring to earlier in terms of potentially thorny issues.
Absolutely. I think what Sherine said is the key to answer all this, like how to dialogue as a team, right? If you have a strong team that you can trust, then you can also push the boundaries and take some risks because we will cover for each other, right? So I feel that the interesting piece is always push boundaries, but how they push boundaries is interesting. Like what is our guideline to decide what you're going to accept or reject in terms of boundary pushing? Let's put it this way. And I feel like those issues are bound to touch upon positionality. And I feel like we had, as a team, several meetings discussing this. So the way we normally organize this was we read all the submissions. Everyone could read all the submissions in all the genre editors, not only the poetry or fiction. And then the genre editors, let's say the poetry editor, made an initial selection and sent questions to the rest of the team. And then that specific editor facilitated the meeting in which we discussed those things. And then eventually we had to talk about positionality, and the fact that Sherine and I knew how some of those authors identified influenced final decisions to some degree, even though, for example, let's say one that I remember, if I can talk vaguely about it, let's say, I remember a piece in which it mattered deeply if it was written by someone identified as a man or as a woman. And then once the fiction editor, for example, knew the identity of the person, was like, no, or, oh, that makes it even more interesting. And we had those conversations, and they are tough. And I think part of it was trying to learn how to be transparent about our decisions and to come up with an ethical guideline. And to write those ethical guidelines was actually hard, and we had to search a lot of journals to see how they approach it. And surprisingly, it's not very common for a journal to transparently communicate what their ethical guidelines are. And it's not easy, so I understand. So we approach research. We had the help of soliloquies, for example. I remember looking into Underblong, Cotton Xenomorph, Kent Hughes, to see how they approached it. And once we had that, and once we agreed on that, it was much easier because we could discuss. And then it was always interesting. It was always an interesting discussion. I wouldn't say it was necessarily thornier because we already trusted each other as editors, but we just took a while to talk about this.
Penelope, were conversations like this, not like it was the very distant past, but it kind of was in terms of a conversation about identity and a conversation about positionality. I think, like Carlos alluded to, the pandemic didn't only shut down Headlight, it shut down and a lot of practices, often not great practices, and made a lot of organizations and institutions rethink certain practices. Do you think some of the conversations that Carlos was alluding to about positionality, about identity, were those conversations that you and your team were having in 2018, 2019, or was that more outside of the scope of the sort of Headlight team at the time?
I mean, we did have them on a case-by-case basis. I mean, there were definitely a couple of pieces, I think, that I remember that I discussed with like the genre editors in charge of them. That we kind of ended up opting out of because we were uncomfortable with the content in relation to what I knew of the identity of the author or something like that. So those issues definitely did exist, but I mean, it sounds like Carlos and Sherine, you did much more in terms of sort of formalizing that, which is great. I mean, we never even thought of actually writing out guidelines or anything, which we probably should have, but no, I mean, we definitely didn't have anything like that. It was really just a case-by-case basis, like, here's a piece. Do we think this is problematic? And we would decide it as a team as well, like you said. It wasn't just me. I definitely didn't want to take all of that upon myself. But there were discussions every now and then related to that. So definitely it's something that I think editors need to be aware of back then too, and more now. You're right. I think the pandemic has brought up a lot more of scrutiny of institutions and identities and things like that. Discussions that need to be had that are overdue. And definitely part of an editor's job to be aware of those.
Thanks, Penelope. Really interesting to think about the changes that have occurred. Sherine, do you have anything to add to that particular conversation? If not, I have another question for you.
No, I don't. I think it's just one of the things that we really managed to do, or we tried to do, is because things were so there was so much upheaval when we took over Headlight. So we thought about all these different things. We thought about, okay, we have to put in ethical guidelines. And this was a lot of Carlos's motivation. Like, we have to do a contributors agreement so that we documented. So we used everything that Penelope had left, and then we built on that by adding like all these different layers so that future editors can just continue on and sort of have all these things already set up.
Misha, can I add something, clarify something?
Yes, of
course. Feel like it's not easy to even define how positionality matters for issues like it. I feel like the issues that were very hard to talk about was like, who has the right to speak for whom, right? So, and not that we're saying you can't speak for somebody else, it's just how you do it is what matters and where you're coming from. So we felt like we had some interesting pieces. There were no in terms of how the person developed the narrator or the speaker in that situation, because we felt like it was not fair to speak for some other group with which you didn't have you were not accountable to, or you should be accountable to. So it's hard to talk vaguely about those things, but also I mean I cannot just ask submissions here but even though we could over later over a drink or so. But these are fascinating conversations. I think the editors have to be aware of it and have to discuss it. And I also just like to say that Penelope, is not like when you were EIC, you didn't have challenges. There was an institutional crisis at Concordia. And I remember well that the preface of the interruptions, in that preface, I feel like Emily and you took a very political stance about the department and how Headlight positioned itself according to the upheaval that was happening in sexual harassment scandals at Concordia at the time. And I feel like it's not that your time was without challenges. I just want to say that as well.
You know, speaking of, I will segue just because my next question topic is about the institution or institutions broadly. And I was going to ask Sherine to start, because I know, Sherine, you've been involved in, senior editorial capacities with non-academically linked journals. And one thing that I find interesting about Headlight, and it's not the only journal to exist in this space, but it's a journal at an academic institution that's not an academic journal. And unlike some other creative journals at academic institutions, it's also not housed in, couched in an MFA program, right? It's being produced by, or sort of being para-produced by an academic department. And so I just think it's an interesting sort of liminal space for the journal to exist in. And so I guess starting with Sherine, how do you think this sort of within, without relationship with academia and creativity affects Headlight? How do you think it makes Headlight different or not from other journals that you've been involved with?
I think it does make it different, and it makes it special because, again, like sort of what Carlos said earlier, like it's all about like the power dynamics. How do you divide power? And when you have a foot in different departments, it also gives Headlight quite a bit of independence, so that you're always able to take a stand. So the way that Emily and Penelope did in their issue, and the way, although we are funded by the department, but because it's a creative journal, we also are not overseen by any professors. They support us and help us whenever we need to, but at the end of the day, it's produced by the graduate students. And that independence, especially as a creative literary journal, is so strong. That gives you an edge, and it gives you a way to shine. And I think that's why also we've always had writers from the Montreal community, from Quebec, from across Canada throughout the 25 years submit to Headlight. They know Headlight. And so usually student-run journals within literary, MFA programs don't have such wide appeal. And I think this sort of this space that Headlight occupies, having a foot in and a foot out, it gives it a sort of edge and independence.
Great. Carlos, you're someone who has operated within institutions, within a variety of academic institutions, and writes a lot about that kind of operating within and without of institution and bureaucracy. How do you think that impacts Headlight as a journal?
Well, it does. And I also love the fact that Headlight is a meeting point for the different streams in the department, right? Because if you are in the creative writing stream, you don't necessarily meet the academic side all the time, because you're having very intensive year-long workshops. So Headlight gave us a chance to meet. I mean, I don't know if I would have studied with Sherine otherwise, except that we did take Persian poetry together. So we happened to align in a few courses as well. But I feel like this special space that was created for Headlight allows people from different streams to meet, and also from different departments, because now the Headlight is clarifying who can work in each position. We have been collaborating more with design students and elsewhere. And another interesting thing that I think happens with Headlight is the collaboration of Soliloquies, which is our sister journal in the undergrad side. And I feel like we overlap a lot, in which the editors of Headlight are not going to publish themselves, neither the editors of Soliloquies, but ended up taking submissions for each other as well. So it's also an interesting space. And I feel like this meeting of different academic streams, also grad and undergrad students and different departments, is very crucial for Headlight, and it makes it more special. And I feel like the creative writing stream inside of the English department operates pretty much like an MFA, but because we're not in fine arts, we cannot say we're MFA, but we are the equivalent. Whenever you say MFA or equivalent, we are the equivalent. But because of the academic students, and because they also participate actively in Headlight, I feel like it becomes more precious, more interesting, right? These different perspectives. And the conversations that you have within poetry students and fiction students are not necessarily the same, right? I mean, I feel like in poetry, you always discuss positionality, whereas in fiction, they're always discussing voice and other things that we not necessarily, like a narrative arc, developed narrative arc. I feel like Misha and I were together in a hybrid course that I feel like brought those conversations together recently, but that's not very common as well. So I feel like it's a precious space because of all of this.
So, Penelope, Carlos alluded to institutional turmoil during your time with Headlight, and you can talk about that or not. But same question as I've asked Sherine and Carlos in different ways. How do you feel? And you're someone who's worked as an editor also post Headlight in sort of other in non-literary and non-journal capacities, but has continued to work as an editor. So how do you feel like all of these streams come together to make Headlight different from those other experiences, opportunities, or not?
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things about a journal like this is what it does for the students in terms of training, which was also already briefly mentioned. And like Sherine just said about how it has this kind of independence, even though it's based in the department. It's just a really good experience in terms of kind of, letting students take charge and sort of run wild, and the issue is going to be whatever they make it and wherever they lead it. And I know for me, those experiences were super useful for my professional life after university as well. In some ways, maybe more useful than, the degree itself that I got. Because it's a lot of experience with, taking the initiative, just managing a lot of different administrative tasks like project coordination, basically. And it is a really good training ground for many things. So I think, that is one of the most important functions that a journal like this serves, is that it gives students, young writers, young academics, whoever is there, the chance to create something of their own and really learn a lot at the same time, which is going to help them wherever they go in the future, most likely. That's one of the things that stands out to me. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it there for now. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask two more briefer questions, and then I'd love if there's time, if you all have any questions sort of for each other. I think that would be really interesting as well. My first question is for each of you, and whoever thinks of an answer first can answer. Is there a piece either from your own tenure with Headlight, or if you're a well-read Headlight reader from other issues of Headlight, that stands out as a piece that in some way represents Headlight, either to you or to a readership?
That's very tough, Misha. You're asking us to pick favorites from our issue. We can't. We love them equally. We refuse. But I can talk about, maybe I can talk about Penelope's issue, and then
I'm not saying the best. I'm not saying that, the best piece or your favorite piece, but just a piece that somehow represents what you think. Every journal ends up having a vibe, regardless of whether it's a general audience journal or this Headlight doesn't have a specific, it doesn't have a specific leaning. It's not a sci-fi journal. It's not a specifically feminist journal. I mean, but is there a piece that just that feels Headlight to you?
Well, I'll start since I'm already unmuted, and then just mention the first piece we accepted was we opened for submissions, and we also solicited a few pieces. And the first one that came through was a piece by poet Manahil Bandukwala, who is going to be a special guest tomorrow at the relaunch. And Manahil sent us this piece saying, like, I don't know about this piece. It's a hybrid piece, poetry and creative nonfiction, and I'm still to find a home for this piece. And then it's called, and I'm gonna open here so I don't, it's here, the issue. It's titled, it's a long title, Turning 24 on the Rise of the Sturgeon Moon. And then Manahil didn't know the Headlight was turning into issue 24 when they submitted to us. And then as soon as we saw it and then gave it this beautiful, it's gorgeous, gave us the goosebumps, we're like, okay, this is the right piece. We're doing the right thing. We solicited from the right person, and then it moves us. And it's a very complex piece about biology and looking into the future and thinking about both cyclical time and linear time. And so I feel like it really embodied what it meant to look ahead in terms of Headlight, to use the art cliche, Headlights always looking ahead. And it felt like it just felt right. And then it gave us a lot of confidence to think we're doing the right thing for Headlight. So I feel like that felt right. And then I'm just shouting out because it was already a solicited different piece, but I refuse to pick favorites otherwise.
No, that's great. Thanks, Carlos.
I'm going to sort of continue that because Manahil is here tomorrow, right? Live in person at Fourth Space. And so I think also what's really important about that piece is the recording. And it takes on a different life of its own. It's a very moving piece, but when you hear Manahil read it, like the pauses and it just hits you even harder. And I think if there's something about our issue that's completely different and something that Carlos envisioned, and I didn't know that he had envisioned before we met, was adding voice and using spoken web and having that element that replaces the voice when you read something, that actually puts the author's voice. And for like your piece, Misha, like nothing beats you reading your own poetry, I must say. It just, it nails it. So it's such a treat to have that on our website, the voice of each author that decided to, of course, record as an extra element and an extra bonus to the issue.
Thanks,
that's the right answer, Sherine. Tubes is our favorite because it's by Misha.
Yes,
that's the right answer.
Yeah, I was hoping that all three of you would say that, even Penelope. No, but I think that I think that when we talk about being within an institution, I think we could talk about the advantage of just having access to those sorts of facilities. I mean, I've recorded poems for journals before, but I've never gotten to do it with in a professional recording studio with the help of a professional recording artist student. So I think that it's it's helpful to have those resources that journals that don't operate within academic institutions just simply don't have access to. And also the fact that it is based in this institution means that not all of its contributors are based here in Jacques et Montréal, but a lot are, and so most could actually come to this very building and 6 floors up record their poems, which is a great bonus. Penelope, I've mused to give you time to think back to your issue, or the issue that you just read, if you have a piece that you wanted to point to.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about it. I have the old issues next to me, and I was just like thinking about if there's one I can pick out. For Headlight 24, which is, I mean, the one I read most recently, is I agree. The piece that Carlos and Sherine were talking about as well, I think it is really, I mean, just kind of perfect, right time, and a really good way to open that. And yeah, just very emblematic of Headlight. So I have to agree with that. For Headlight 22, I mean, one piece that I remember very well is, I mean, I'm not sure if anyone here has read that issue recently, so I don't know if anyone will recognize it. But if you go back into the archives, you'll find it. Deanna Radford had the poem An Introduction to Cloud Genera. And Deanna was in the program with me. She's super lovely. I remember her well. And I think it's just kind of a really appropriate poem for Headlight because if you read it, it's about clouds, on the surface it's about clouds, but there's a lot of kind of almost like scientific data interspersed with it about like different types of clouds, like nimbus clouds, whatever the other ones are. And I think it's just kind of a really interesting blending of like academic and poetic. I think there's even like a reference at the end or something, like a footnote to some like weather reference text or something. And to me, things like that really appeal to me because it's just kind of, again, as you were talking about, like the blending of the academic side and the creative side. So something like that is a piece that I guess I would say I think is, very representative of Headlight and the kind of collisions it brings about, which are then really fun to read. And I guess I wanted to mention, I mean, maybe this is overly simplistic, but just the cover of Headlight 24, that it's like the kind of blurry headlight image. I think it's like, I mean, it's, yeah, right behind Carlos on the screen. I mean, it's very simple, but like it really is perfect. And I think it also is just like an apt name for the issue in general, and always has been, in terms of like the kind of blurry light looking ahead. And I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think the first issue, it also had like an image of like a car with headlights on it, right? Or something. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's really cool to see that kind of come full circle. And yeah, so Headlight, gotta have a picture of headlights, but I really like that.
Carlos has really mastered the depth required to show an image that doesn't get, not for it to be warped.
It's hard. It's hard.
Green screen background. So kudos on that.
Yeah, and kudos to our designer Evelyn O'Hanley,
yeah,
who created this image and was printed with the risograph at the Center for Expanded Poetics. And I love your interpretation, Penelope, of this blurry cover. And I love that we both of us shout out at poems that have environmental stakes. And I feel that's interesting. I was also thinking of since you mentioned the first poem in our issue, I was thinking of the first poem in your issue with Emily that you managed. It's by Alexi Perry Cox. It's like, as noted, language is migrant, which is for me is always important, and then it's like right up my alley in terms of poetry. And that poem became important in Alexi's current collection that was just published. So talking about the Headlight as a training ground for book, and Alexi's book, marvelous book called Place, Crossed Out Place, includes that poem that was first published in Headlight, which I also find it very cool, thinking about the moving ahead.
So moving ahead, wow, what a great segue to my last question. We've talked a lot about the past and the present of Headlight. And so I'd ask each of you what you hope for the future of Headlight, sort of in a philosophical sense or in a succinct, realistic sense. What do you hope becomes of Headlight as it moves on from your tenures and moves into the future? Whoever wants to jump in.
I guess I can start if
Thank
that's
you.
okay.
Thank you. Please.
Yes, please.
Okay. I guess first of all, the basic hope is just for survival. Wow, that sounds like a low expectation, but it is important. And I feel like there was a piece in 24 that also talked about the desire is to survive, something like that. That's a line that stuck out to me a lot. And I think that's really important. And it is one of the big challenges for, a journal that's kind of so like cyclical. And it sees all these students kind of on their way as they pass through this program. It is always a challenge, transitioning between cohorts and keeping it going with the same level of motivation. So that's what I hope, first of all, is that, it's going to go on and on and on. And I don't know, like in a century, we'll still have Headlight. Like that would be amazing. So that's the first hope. And in terms of what Carlos and Sherine did this year with the recordings, that kind of really expanded my imagination as well. So I think it would be amazing if we might see more of kind of like multimedia exploration in the future as well, as technology moves forward too, and Headlight kind of hopefully absorb some of the energy from society around it. So I'd be excited to see what could happen with that as well. I just hope that it continues to be a really fun and engaging way for students to have some great experiences with literature and be close to their literary community. And that's what I hope. So, kind of basic, but very close to my heart. Yeah.
No, that's great. Not basic at all. Carlos, you look like you're ready to jump in.
I really agree. I feel like these are the hopes. And then I should say that I'm Gemini, so I always have conflicting hopes. Like on one side, I hope that the bureaucracy is a little bit easier for the next team, and hopefully that'll be the case. And then people get to build upon whatever the current team created. The other side of me wants the next team to just destroy everything and create something new. So I feel like to honor the spirit of Headlight is also to reinvent itself, right? Hopefully the foundations are strong enough that we could allow for a different rebuild next time and an easier rebuild. But that's part of the fun, that the next team will do something else. We have no idea what the next team is going to do. And I hope that they take risks. I hope that they do a different kind of submission process. We tried something different this time. We used do a summa instead of submittable. I mean, we didn't use submittable before. We just couldn't afford submittable. So we used do a summa, which is very interesting. It changed the way we approach submissions. But there's a lot of journals playing with different ways of doing submissions, doing fast rounds of submissions. I feel like Hobart After Dark and Ex-Puritan have been playing with different ways of doing submissions and different ways of publication, perhaps. Why does one issue have to come out at once? Why not 3 times a week new pieces get announced? I mean, there's different ways of thinking about publication and submission, and I hope Headlight gets always to play with that and take some risks. I mean, we don't all need to replicate Poetry Magazine and do the round of submissions and take 6 months to respond, right? We can do things differently. And in fact, I think that's one of the fun things of being a small journal. You can take risks. So that's my conflicting answer of a Gemini.
That's great. Sherine?
Yeah, I think they've almost said it all, right? Like, so you want survival, like Penelope said, survival, fun, and like to continue innovation and multimedia. And and Carlos said, take risks and stay alive, and do both and reinvent yourself. And yeah, and I think all of that is true. I don't have much to add other than, the balls are in the air and they're spinning. So just, good luck to the next team. I know they're very capable. I know they will always exceed my expectations, because that's what new writers do, right? Like they always challenge and they always bring new ideas and new things do, maybe. And I do hope, like Penelope, that, Headlight is around for another 100 years and in different ways, and reinvents itself, and maybe has translation, and maybe has French, and maybe has, more like departmental support from different places in Concordia. And so who knows, the sky's the limit, and that's what, writers dream. So that's what's great about a journal, is that it's a place to dream and to try out those dreams in practical life and see them happen. You can dream big. And I think Carlos revealed an email that he had written before becoming co-managing editor, and he really dreamed big, and those things happened, and he didn't share it with me except in the end, which was pretty sneaky on his part. But yeah, I think it's great to dream big.
Great. Well, I think that Headlight's immediate future is bright. We have the part 2 of the launch tomorrow in the space at 2 p.m. on August 31st, and then at the in September. And I'll throw this in because we have Alexander Oster here in the audience, who was helpful in our Force Avenir process, but we'll be attending a gala in Quebec City as finalists for Force Avenir this year. So at least the immediate financial future of Headlight is hopefully relatively stable and secure. So before we wrap, do any of you have any questions for each other before we wrap things up for this conversation?
I mean, shouldn't we ask you, Misha, what do you see next? Since, because perhaps you should clarify that Headlight has always had part of the team continuing to the following year, which is good in different positions, different responsibilities. So Misha, as part of the transition team, is definitely going to be part of the next team, even though the call for editors is still open and the ultimate arrangement of the team still hasn't been decided. But we know Misha is part of it, as well as Alex and Ariella, who are helping organize the event tomorrow. So, do you have dreams for next year besides financial stability?
Yeah, a great question, Carlos. No, I think I think what Penelope was talking about in terms of multimedia, I think is really interesting, and I think that the audio element of Headlight is one that would seem to be extremely popular and successful in this issue. I would definitely love for Headlight to play with more of what that could look like. Sort of the simplest next step is video. That's sort of the in the history of technological evolution, that's usually what follows audio. But I think that the idea of playing with video in specific ways, I think that video poetry is something that's becoming more and more on vogue, kind of something that maybe we saw a few decades ago that's coming back. And I think the idea of doing video both in terms of at its simplest level, just people performing their piece on video as opposed to just in an audio recording, or in a more complex variety, having someone actually create or having others create video to accompany a piece in a sort of in a less direct way, I think would be really interesting as well. So I think that multimedia approach is sort of endlessly possible. I think there's other organizations that have done initiatives where you submit a poem and someone animates a short video around it, or creates a score about it, and so I think there's endless possibilities for multimedia approaches when it comes to the literary arts. And then another thing that I think would be great is translation is something that I think is really interesting, but also just pieces in in French and or in indigenous languages, in other languages that are spoken here in Jojag and Montreal. I think that being open to pieces and finding capacity to have readers or editors who could read and understand those pieces and evaluate them as is necessary for a journal would be really interesting. I mean, I think the fact that Headlight is I would like to find more and more ways to sort of take advantage of the fact that Headlight is at an institution, a multi-departmental, a multi-departmental institution, and so how can we access? How can we continue to access in ways that you, Sherine, and Carlos did a great job with Spoken Web and with CEP, but how can we continue to access even other departments at the institution who could be helpful and interesting and interested in the things that Headlight is or could be doing. So yeah, I think that in a world where the sort of there's the flora and fauna of journals is broad and vast. There's a lot of journals, and it's sort of both easier and harder than ever to launch one, in that all you need is a blogspot.com domain and you can have a journal, but it's also harder than ever in terms of getting your journal to stand out and to be read. But how can Headlight continue to stand out and to differentiate I'm losing my powers of speech, differentiate itself from the broad variety of journals that are out there. And so with that, if there's nothing else, I would say thank you so much to the three of you. Thank you so much, Penelope, especially for agreeing to be part of this conversation. I should say that I alluded to this at the beginning, but I should say that when Carlos, Sherine, and I sat down to talk about this event, I think your name was the first name that was brought up as someone who they'd be really interested in talking to from Headlight's past, as that you were so influential, and your contributions to Headlight were so appreciated as Carlos and Sherine sought to really relaunch the project. And so thank you for that, and thank you for talking to us today. Thank you, Carlos and Sherine, for all you've done. It's been great to work with you in the capacities. Sorry, there's a fly flying around me. It's been great to work with you both in the capacities with which I've worked with you. And thank you to Fourth Space for hosting us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I was really thrilled to hear from you, and that Headlight was still going so strong, super strong. And yeah, I mean, I just want to congratulate you all on the beautiful issue, and I really hope your launch goes amazing. I mean, I'm sure it will. And yeah, it was so fun to meet you all and to revisit the past a little and also look ahead to the future. So yeah, thanks so much to you. Yeah, very happy to be here.
Thank you, everyone. And I would just add that everyone is invited for tomorrow, right? At 2 p.m. ET, whatever time zone you're in.
Thank you, Misha. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Penelope. Thank you, Fourth Space, for giving us room to talk about Headlight and the editorial process. Yes. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Misha. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, happy to have you. Thanks for coming into our Zoom, and Misha for coming into the space. We're gonna close up that Zoom in just a moment. Thanks again. Have a good afternoon.